This is a walkthrough of the Frames V2 demo app and the Warpcast frame developer tools. This is all live and ready to go in Warpcast right now if you want to start building a V2 frame. We're planning to go live with the initial release of Frames V2 on November 27th, so you have a couple days to get up and running and get started with these tools. Okay, so let's take a look. You can find this demo repo at Farcaster XYZ Frames V2 demo on GitHub. You can clone this, pull this down, and use this as scaffolding for your own Frames V2 application. This is a more or less pretty standard Next.js TypeScript React app. It has a couple tweaks which we will cover when we talk about how to import the SDK and get this up and running. This is because the Frames SDK right now is a front-end only package, so you have to do a couple things with dynamic imports to get it running. But beyond that, this should be a pretty familiar stack for folks who have built on Frames V1. Next.js, TypeScript, Vercel are a pretty popular stack for Frames already. The demo app itself is hosted on Vercel, so you can deploy this, and pretty familiar set of tools. Okay, so yeah, to get started, clone this repo, pull it down, install dependencies with Yarn, and you can spin up a server with Yarn dev. Let's do that now. And one difference from Frames V1 is that at least right now, you are going to want to test your frame through the Warpcast developer tools. We are building these mobile first this time, so it's available in the mobile app rather than on the web app. And in order to access your local server through the mobile app, you'll need to use a tunneling tool like ngrok. So let's do that here. I'm going to spin up ngrok. And this is basically creating a tunnel where I can connect to my local dev server over the internet. Okay, so let's look at the developer tools first. So I'll show you a quick demo of the demo, and then we can look at the code. So you can find a link to it after all this setup stuff in the repo. There it is. So hit this link on your mobile device. This will take you to the frame playground. And in here, you'll see these form fields. You can enter the URL of your app, a splash image, a splash background color, and you can tap to launch your app. This has our old ngrok URL, so let's replace that. Hard mode. Cool. You can see the web request over here. It's tunneling through. This is always a little slow on your local device, but there we go. We've loaded the demo app. There are also a few examples down here if you just want to try some demos. This is the same demo app deployed on Vercel. There's a simple ether send, which will trigger a wallet transaction. There's a yoink demo, a few other things in here. Okay, so we'll tap launch here. Just paste your app URL, your local tunneling URL if you're working locally, maybe your deployed Vercel URL or whatever if this is deployed. Tap launch, and this will launch your app. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about a few of the components of kind of the Frames V2 model. We have three things here. We have the context, which is the user context, the context in which the application was invoked, sort of data, kind of like Frames V2. You have access to how your frame was invoked and who was invoking it. So all that information is now in the context. We have actions. So these are things you can do with your frame, commands you can send back to the Warpcast app or whatever Farcaster client you're embedded in to do things. And then we have interactions with the user's wallet. So first, context. In this demo, you can tap to expand here and see what's available in context. Right now, we are just sending the user. And for this initial Frames release, important to note that we're just sending the unauthenticated user. So in Frames V1, eventually we're going to build out the ability to get authenticated access to this data. But for now, you should assume that this user is unauthenticated and spoofable. So don't use this information to grant privileged access to some credential or some special thing in your application. It's okay to use it to display, display the username, display the profile picture, that sort of contextual information, as long as you're not using it in a way that really relies on it for authentication. But there are lots of use cases where it's, okay if this is spoofable, okay if this is untrusted, but do assume for now that this is untrusted, at least for the next week or so while we're continuing to build up the SDK. But yeah, you can see here I'm logged in context, and you can see my FID, my username, my display name, and etc. all here in the context. So this is available through the SDK that we've included in the Frames app, and we can access this contextual data. Over time, we'll probably add more information in here, like how your frame was invoked, sort of which trigger invoked it, maybe data about the client, maybe some other things in context. But for now, you have access to the user. We have actions. There are 2 of them available right now. One opens an external URL. I'm not going to demo that now because it's going to mess up my screen sharing, but you can tap this and it will open an external URL in the app. And one which just closes the frame. So we'll tap this. There we go. So of course in this demo, these are just wired up to buttons so you can test them. In a real app, though, you can invoke these programmatically, right? You can do this in response, not just to a user tapping a button, but to whatever you need to do for the context of your application. Okay, third thing in here is the user's wallet. So this is probably most interesting. You can send transactions, interact with the user's wallet. We have 3 buttons in here: one to send a transaction, one to sign a message, one to sign typed data. And yeah, you can see my connected Farcaster wallet address. And let's tap send transaction. This will take me out to my wallet and request a yoink. I'm going to cancel that for now. Cool. So unlike the old Frames model where we had kind of like a multi-step HTTP request thing for requesting a transaction, this is just an Ethereum provider. So you can use WAGMI, you can use VM, you can use kind of the typical tools you're used to in building a web application to interact with the user's wallet. So hopefully this is useful for people to build like much richer, much more expressive wallet interactions. Cool. I think that's the model. Let's go take a look at how it's all set up in the code. Let's start from kind of the center of the app, and then we'll work back to how the Next.js app itself is configured. So here's the core component of this app. It's this demo component. You can find it here in components demo. And yeah, let's look at a few pieces of this. So thing number 1, you will want to import this Farcaster Frame SDK library. And this is where you will program all your interactions with the parent Farcaster app, right? So this is where you'll find the context, where you'll find triggering those actions, where you'll find the wallet provider that you can use to connect to the user's wallet. So we've imported this here. And this is a pretty long and gnarly component because it has all these different buttons and interactions, but let's just look at some pieces of it one by one. So the first thing you need to do when you load an application is call this special action called ready. This action signals to the Farcaster app that your application is loaded, and it will hide the splash screen. So every app defines, you can see here, we've defined this splash image and background color. In fact, let's change our background color here to like just black, just as a demo. There it goes. So this is going to make the experience of loading into a frame much more consistent, feel much faster for users, but it's up to you as the developer of your frame app to call this action, which indicates I'm loaded, I've done any data loading I need to do, I've done any authentication maybe that you need to do, my app is ready, hide the splash screen and show it to the user. If you don't do this, you won't see anything in the app, right? So I think, classic kind of like common so far first step thing is make sure you're calling this to display your app in the first place. So in a React app, you'll probably want to do it like we're doing here. We have an effect. Once the app renders, we just call ready on the SDK. And in fact, let's remove this and just show you. If we don't call ready, this is just going to hang forever. Let's put that back. And there we go. Okay. that's step number one, showing the app as soon as it's ready. Thing number two is accessing the context. So here we are going to grab the context out of the SDK. We're storing it in state, just to simplify things a little bit here. You can grab frame context type out of the SDK as well. And we're displaying it down here. We have this little toggle component. Let's just ignore that. We'll always display the context. Cool. And there you go. You can see we are showing the whole context in here. Maybe we want to say, hello, context, username. Cool. So you can access this. Again, it's untrusted user data, so don't use this for authentication, but you can use it in contexts where it's okay if potentially this user data is spoofed to you. Okay, triggering actions. So here are our action buttons. You can see we've got open link here. Let's take a look at that one. So this is just a standard React button with a on-click handler. And here's how you can interact with the SDK to actually call an action in response to some interaction. Really simple, just SDK actions, and you'll find them all on here. There's ready, open URL, close. And in this case, we'll call open URL, pass this YouTube link, so tap that button, and it will direct you to YouTube. Same thing with close. We've just got a callback, wire it up to a React button. So actions are, super simple for now. These are both very basic for V0, but we're going to be building out more commands and actions and things you can do. Right now, close has no arguments. In the future, we'll probably let you close and show a toast. Open URL can direct you to other URLs, and we have a few others. Go check out the frame spec because we are anticipating adding a few additional actions in future versions of this SDK. For right now, though, we think people mostly want to use the wallet-related stuff, so you can get away with just a couple simple actions for basically opening links and closing the frame. Okay, wallet stuff. Let's take a look at this. This is a little bit more complicated. So for wallet stuff, you are able to just use WAGMI. So in this example, we're using WAGMI, which is a React hooks library for interacting with user wallets and Ethereum applications. Let's work back from interacting with the hooks here, and then we can go look at the WAGMI setup itself. So we're using some pretty standard WAGMI hooks here, right? Use accounts to get the user's address and whether or not they're connected. Send transaction hooks, as well as this data about the status of the transaction. And wait for transaction receipt to show the track and watch the result of a transaction. We have some buttons that are also wired up to signing a message, signing type data. I won't go over those now, but you can go look in the repo, go look at the code at how those are wired up. Here's our transaction button callback. This is an interaction with Yoink. I've just hard-coded the Yoink contract address and the Yoink function selector here. But this will just call the Yoink function on the Yoink contract, and then on success, we'll hold on to the hash of that transaction so that we can monitor it. So down here, we've got a button. When we click it, we're going to trigger that sendTX callback, and then we're tracking some stuff like the connection status of the wallet, whether we're already sending a transaction. If we show an error, we'll show an error down here. And once the transaction executes and we have the hash, we will monitor it and show the status. If you've built with WAGMI before, this should look pretty familiar. We're just using those same hooks that you may have used in other web applications. So we think this is going to be a good model for building a much richer transaction experience. Okay, let's just demo this end to end. We'll do a Yoink here, tap send transaction. confirm in my wallet. And yeah, there we go. We've got the hash and transaction confirmed. Cool. So that's the core. The big ideas here are load the SDK, call SDK actions ready on render when you're ready to hide the splash screen and your app is ready to be displayed to the user. Call SDK actions to perform interactions with the Farcaster client, and then use VM or WAGMI or the provider that's been provided through this SDK context to use standard React hooks and things to interact with the user's wallet. Okay, let's work back to a couple of the funkier things about the way this app is laid out. So the main thing right now is that this SDK library is a client-side only package. It relies on access to window. So you'll need to do a couple things in terms of setup in Next.js to get this to work. Easiest way to get started is just clone this and use our scaffolding as your starter repo, but we can look at kind of how that's set up here. So the big thing is using this next dynamic package and dynamic imports in a couple places. So yeah, let's look at how we've set up our WAGMI provider. When you set up WAGMI and use these hooks, you need to provide a provider higher up in your React component hierarchy to provide access to those WAGMI hooks. And in our case, we need to set it up in a kind of particular way here. So yeah, let's just walk through layout, sort of the entry point to our app. This should look pretty standard for a Next app. I've extracted a separate providers component here, which is going to be the whole provider stack for our application. So if you wanted to add other providers here, right, like React Query, or you have other React tools, right? Plenty of React packages and tools require a large provider stack, a bunch of different nested providers. You could add those here. In this case, we're only using this WAGMI provider. We need to load it dynamically, though, because this is making use of this SDK library. So here's how you do that. You can use this idiom, the next dynamic package. We need to define it as a client component and then import it this way and tell it not to do SSR. You can find this WAGMI provider here in Components Providers WAGMI provider. If you look at the WAGMI docs, this is like pretty standard setup for the provider, but we are setting it up to connect to base. You could add in your app whatever chains you're interested in connecting to. We are also using this special connector. So in order to connect to the Farcaster wallet, we've defined a custom connector. You can find this in lib connector ts. And you can see this is interacting with the provider, this SDK wallet ETH provider object. There's a lot of code in here. We're going to roll this into the Frame SDK, so you can just import this connector from there. But for now, this is kind of copy paste. You'll need to use this to connect to the wallet. But yeah, sit tight. In the next few days, this will be in the Frame SDK. Okay, so back to provider. We're importing that custom connector, setting that up as our wallet connector, and then just passing this config to WAGMI, wrapping the rest of our application in that. And then from there down, we can access these hooks and do interactions with the wallet. Second place we need to do dynamic import is here when we're importing this demo component. So basically anywhere you have an import of the SDK, you need to load that component dynamically, make it a client-side component right now. So we're doing that also here in our homepage, right? Our default page. We will load this demo component dynamically and put it in our homepage here. The rest of this should, I think, look like standard Next.js. So main change is just a couple dynamic imports. And let's actually remove this so you can see what happens. If we don't do a dynamic import here and try to render this server side, okay, you can see an error there. Let's load over here. Yeah, we're not going to call ready, right? So we can't see it here. But yeah, you'll see, let's look at the console error. Okay, this is saying, okay, this needs to be a client component because we need to use state, sure. Okay, maybe this one doesn't need to be imported dynamically, but point being, if you see issues typically loading like access to window within the app, you may need to load it dynamically. So in most places where you're importing the SDK, it needs to be client side. I think actually we may not need it there. Let's try on our provider side. Or whatever. I'll skip this for now. But yeah, when you see issues with window, you'll need to potentially import dynamically. If you have any questions, just like use our layout in this repo as your cheat sheet. I think that covers it. Big points. There's a tutorial as well, sort of written tutorial step by step that goes through building out each of these components in a little bit more detail. So walk through this. This is all long and detailed here in the README that goes step by step and builds each of these, shows interacting with context, actions, and wallet. And yeah, important points here. This is a Next.js web app, TypeScript, React, Next, Vercel. Similar stack to what folks are familiar with from Frames v1. To get started with your app, clone this, use the scaffolding we have set up to make sure you're sort of doing the dynamic imports correctly. But once you have that core of applications set up, import the Frames SDK, call ready once it's ready to display to the user. Within the context of that app, you can read user context and sort of data from the context, from SDK context. You can invoke actions and commands in the Farcaster app by calling sdk.actions, and you can connect up to the user's wallet using WAGME and SDK wallet ETH provider. So pretty minimal set of tools right now for this V0 developer preview, but enough to get started building interactive applications that are on chain that call into the user's wallet. So plenty of interesting things we think people can build here in the next couple of days. So yeah, take a look at it. Please reach out to me, horsefacts.eth, on Warpcast, or Tony, Diodad, if you have questions, feedback, or comments. And if you'd like to be added to the Frames v2 developer chat, let us know as well. Cool. Happy Framesgiving.